Story 1. During World War II, the Japanese built a human testing facility in China, which has come to be known as Unit 731. This was worse than many concentration camps, but the people involved were never punished because the United States granted them immunity and attempted to cover it up in exchange for access to their research. The Soviet Union attempted to try the people involved, and the United States called it communist propaganda. The test subjects included prisoners, but also the homeless, the mentally disabled, and random Chinese civilians kidnapped from nearby towns, including pregnant women and infants. Vivisections, cutting a person open with a T-shaped cut, were regularly performed, usually without anesthesia. Patients' limbs were randomly removed and improperly reattached to observe the outcomes, and internal organs were also randomly taken. All without anesthesia, of course. Prisoners were also injected with sexually transmitted diseases, mainly syphilis, and then forced at gunpoint to rape other prisoners to spread the disease. Some of these prisoners included pregnant women. In such cases, they would either be vivisected alive and have their fetuses removed, or the syphilis-riddled babies would be born and eventually killed. They also participated in biological warfare in several cities, usually by infecting fleas with paratyphoid and releasing them. They tested various weapons on the prisoners, notably grenades and chemical bombs. They subjected people to pressure chambers until their eyeballs popped, spun people in centrifuges until they died, burned them alive, placed people in gas chambers, injected them with random substances, and froze their limbs before breaking them off. Most of the experiments had no practical application and were done purely out of sadism. The Japanese government didn't officially admit to this until 2003, and the United States still actively denies it. For more horrific war crimes committed by the Japanese, consider reading about the rape of Nanking. Story 2. There is a whale called 52 Blue that only sings at its frequency, meaning it can't communicate with other whales. It is nicknamed the loneliest whale on the planet. Story 3. Your intestines will wriggle themselves back into the correct position. Doctors who perform any type of intestinal surgery don't have to worry too much about how they put the intestines back in. Story 4. The reason you are supposed to contact a doctor if you have an erection lasting longer than 4 hours is that prolonged priapism can lead to gangrene of the penis. Blood goes in, deoxygenates, but cannot leave, so there is no way for fresh, oxygenated blood to come in, causing the tissue to turn black and die. Do not worry, though. This can be treated by using a large syringe to remove the trapped blood. Story 5. There are 8 unaccounted for American nuclear weapons and literally an unknown quantity of missing Soviet nuclear weapons that range from warheads to suitcase bombs. Story 6. People who commit suicide by jumping off a bridge, and those who don't die from the impact, drown because the impact breaks enough bones that prevents them from swimming. Story 7. There is a mysterious illness called the sweating sickness that hit in multiple small epidemics in the early modern era. It was incredibly contagious and massively deadly, with about a 50% average death rate, but it could be higher. It began with an ominous sense of apprehension, followed by severe pains in the neck and giddiness. They then abruptly stopped and switched to heavy sweating, headaches, and delirium. Finally, the person was hit with an extreme urge to sleep, and it was thought to be fatal if you succumbed to it. We know almost nothing about it, nothing about how it spread, how it was caused. Only that if you got it, you were either surviving or dead within 24 hours. There are horror stories of people leaving town on hunting trips and returning the same day to find almost everybody in the village dead, with only a few scattered survivors. The worst thing was you did not gain immunity. You could live through the sweating sickness once and then get it a few days later and die. Or live through it 2 or 3 times and then get it and die. It was horrific, and we do not know why it disappeared, and we do not know if it will ever return. Story 8. The lemmings are not suicidal, and the documentary that filmed it was actually showing lemmings being thrown down a cliff because they needed the scene but couldn't make the animals do it. Story 9. People who survive the Holocaust and get Alzheimer's often think they are back in the camps. So they escape one of humanity's greatest horrors only to die in it 50 years later. Story 10. There is a genetic disease called fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva where your muscles and tissue turn to bone, often called the human statue disease. Eventually, people may have to decide whether they want to become frozen in a sitting, flat, or standing position. Story 11. People with extreme scurvy start to have all of their old wounds open up. Everything with a scar is held together via an active process with collagen. And without vitamin C, it just sort of stops. Story 12. Penguins aggressively mate with anything that looks vaguely penguin-like or does not move. In fact, it was so rampant that the 1910 to 1913 Scott Antarctic expedition decided it was best not to bring it up so society would not have to deal with the issue it would raise. Scientists witnessed males having intercourse with other males and with deceased females, including several that had died the previous year. They also observed them sexually coercing females and chicks and occasionally killing them. The scientists blamed this astonishing depravity on hooligan males and recorded their observations in Greek so that only an educated gentleman would understand the horrors they had witnessed. Story 13. A blue-ringed octopus, found in the Pacific, is a tiny and cute little creature. But one painless bite delivers enough venom to kill 25 adult males. Note, as long as you are given medical attention within an hour of receiving the bite, you'll be fine. Story 14. The search and rescue dogs on September 11th were getting so sad from finding only dead bodies that the human helpers buried themselves in the rubble so the dogs could find them and be happy. Story 15. In Australia, there is a plant called the gympie, which has such a severe sting that horses who brush against it throw themselves off cliffs because they would rather die than continue to experience the pain. Story 16. Climbing Mount Everest has a 6.5% mortality rate. What's more harrowing is that if you die, you will most likely be left there. There are currently over 200 dead bodies on Everest that are irretrievable and now serve as markers for other climbers. Not a bad place to eternally rest, but upsetting for those left behind who cannot give you a proper burial. Story 17. Rabies is terrifying. You can get it and not even know it from bats, which live across the globe. It might hit you right away, or it might be in 3 years. But it doesn't matter because once symptoms set in, you're already dead. Story 18. Male dolphins often hunt fertile females in groups and pursue them when they are unwilling. The females are often injured during this, and some even die. Story 19. It was once thought that for birds, such as parrots and magpies, to learn to talk, you had to release their tongue. This was done by cutting their tongue completely or partly off, of course, without any anesthesia or painkillers. The tongue release plays absolutely no role in the bird's ability to talk. Story 20. The little girl who voiced Dougie in the first Land Before Time was murdered by her father before the movie came out. Her gravestone says, "Yep, yep, yep." Story 21. Greifswald Nuclear Power Plant, 1976. The almost Chernobyl of East Germany. In short, due to a short circuit resulting in a fire, almost all coolant pumps failed. The New York Times says, a Chernobyl-scale nuclear disaster was prevented only when a single water pump in the emergency cooling system was able to draw off pressurized water heated to high temperature by the decay heat left in the reactor's core, thus preventing a meltdown. This incident became public with reunification in 1989. Story 22. There is a non-zero maximum threshold for the amount of cockroach that can be present in ground coffee because it is literally impossible to keep them out entirely. Story 23. The threat of a deadly bird flu spreading to humans is always there. It takes just a little bit of negligence in screening chickens for this to happen. Story 24. The image that most people have of blobfish is based on a misconception. People think that's what they look like all the time, but blobfish are adapted to live in deep waters, which means the deeper you go, the more water pressure there is. Their bodies are not meaty like other fish, but more gelatinous, because they adapted to the water pressure. If you accidentally pull them to higher levels with less water pressure, their bodies don't handle it well because there's nothing keeping their bodies intact, so their bodies deform. Basically, every photo you've seen of a blobfish where they look big and pink, and, of course, blobby, is a photo of a deceased blobfish. Merchandise and cartoons are designed after what they look like when deceased. They're referred to as what they look like when deceased. Story 25. During World War I, thousands of dogs were taken from families for the war effort. When the war was over, most of them were just shot because it was cheaper than feeding them for the trip home and finding their homes. Story 26. Oftentimes when pandas have cubs, if they have more than one, They will choose which one to keep and abandon the other because they can't care for two. Grizzly bears are the opposite. If they have a litter of just one, sometimes they'll abandon it and try to mate again the next year to attempt for a litter of multiple cubs. Edited to add, thanks everyone. Never thought these sad bear facts would blow up. To all the people saying pandas are obeying China's one-child policy, this is true. Pandas are good law-abiding boys and girls. To the person who gave me the wholesome award, maybe rethink your priorities, haha. But thank you nonetheless. Also, I think a cub exchange program between grizzlies and pandas is a superb idea. Let's get started on Growler for bears. Story 27. Certain sleep disorders that cause you to act out your dreams are strong predictors that you are developing a neurodegenerative disorder like Parkinson's or Lewy body dementia. I wish I did not recently learn about it. Not me, a loved one. Story 28. During the Seoul Olympics in 1988, a large number of doves were released into the stadium. When the giant brazier was lit, many of the released doves were sitting in it, resulting in many doves being burned alive. Story 29. In countries that require you to opt in to organ donation, fewer than 15% of people register. In the United States, an opt-in country, 18 people die every day waiting for an organ transplant. Opt-out countries see over 90% of their population registered for organ donation. Story 30. The constrictor knot is one of the most difficult knots to untie. After being tied, it can be nearly impossible to untie once tightened. I'm assuming you misspelled "not" in your question. Story 31. Gmail scans every photo you send on the service. Illegal pornography was smuggled so frequently on the service that they had to implement a bot to detect it. They will report you to authorities. While I'm sure the average user isn't smuggling this content, they probably don't want all their pictures being looked at either. Story 32. Chronic wasting disease is a prion disease similar to mad cow disease for deer, and it is 100% fatal. The main issue is that prion cannot be destroyed, so an infected deer could urinate in a field, spreading the disease into the soil and then into the food we eat. It has been shown to infect some primates as well, so the risk of human transmission must not be ignored. Learning that last night definitely kept me from sleeping soundly. If you are concerned about the spread of chronic wasting disease and its potential impact on human health, I advise you to reach out to your representatives. Let them know that you want more federal funding to support the surveillance and research of chronic wasting disease. It is not yet a public health crisis, and it might never become one, but we have the opportunity to prevent it from becoming one. Story 33. Sudden doomsday scenarios. Gamma-ray bursts, for example, aimed at Earth, even if occurring hundreds of millions of light years away, could lead to the extinction of life on Earth. Story 34. First responders are always at least minutes away, and you can die in seconds. We operate fast-moving death machines and are often separated from others operating them by nothing more than an agreement not to cross a yellow line that someone else painted. Story 35. Sloths only have enough energy for their weekly toilet trip to the jungle floor. If the baby falls from their underside in the trees onto the floor, they choose to preserve their energy and leave it to be eaten. Story 36. Drinking urine used to be a popular activity in ancient times. Physicians used to describe urine as a remedy for a number of diseases until a recent time when scientists discovered that there is no evidence to support any beneficial health claims of drinking urine. What I meant is that it was normalized back then. Now, it is practiced by few superstitious fanatics and porn enthusiasts. Story 37. If you shine a flashlight or smartphone on a newborn sea turtle for too long, which could be only minutes, it will start crawling around in circles. Known as the Ring of Death, it means that the turtle's eyesight has been permanently damaged due to mistaking your lights for the moon that guides it to the sea. By doing this, you have doomed the sea turtle to death right after birth. Story 38. There is something called a gamma-ray burst. Basically, some stars will periodically produce a burst of gamma rays with no warning. If this happens to a star close enough to the Earth and hits the Earth, we will be hit by a burst of gamma radiation with no warning. Every living thing on the side of the Earth it hits will die, and Earth's atmosphere will be permanently damaged. This could lead to most, if not all, of the population on the other side of the planet also dying. It's a civilization-ending event, and there's nothing we can do to defend against or predict it. Story 39. Between 10 and 20% of United States adults are functionally illiterate. This does not mean they cannot read or write at all, but that they cannot comprehend what they are reading at a high enough level to do many basic tasks, like filling out a form. To make matters worse, a very large proportion of these people do not realize they have a problem with literacy and self-report as being fine at reading and writing. Story 40. Eating undercooked pork can have worse results than just food poisoning. Undercooked pork can contain parasites that burrow into your brain and lay eggs. Side effects include many different neurological symptoms like seizures and dizziness. If untreated for long enough, it can lead to death.